Guys, I know you hate it when people do this, but I think I've changed my pick. Just kidding. No, I haven't, guys. I'm just messing with you. Once I've made my pick, it's made. Unless I see something that really is significant or something happens that makes me think, God, I really do need to rethink this. But no, this video is not about reassessing my prediction for the fight. This video is purely just to analyze and take a look at the weigh-ins and the body language and the face-off. Because the really interesting thing for this fight is that they have a ceremonial weigh-in as opposed to just, you weigh in and that's the main event. They weighed in earlier in the day, much earlier in the day, in fact. And so what we get with this fight is the benefit of seeing what they look like on the scales and then seeing what they look like when they'd rehydrated a considerable amount prior to the ceremonial weigh-in. I think it's really interesting, both guys look absolutely fantastic at both weigh-ins. The weigh-in where they'd cut the weight, neither of them looked significantly dehydrated in my opinion. Canelo obviously looked a little tighter than Crawford did. Getting on the scale, they both weighed 167.5, and I expect there to have been a fairly more considerable rehydration for Canelo. But I predicted all along there'll be 5 to 10 pounds in it between the weights of the two guys in this fight. And looking at them facing off on the stage when they'd both fully rehydrated, I still think that Crawford will be around 173 to 178 pounds in the ring, whereas I think Canelo will be around 180 to 182. It's been interesting during all the face-offs because it's actually been Canelo who looks away first, and a lot of people read stuff into that. They go, oh, look, whoever looks away first, that's the one who's mentally weaker. But I think sometimes you can read into that. But with these guys, where they're so experienced and so professional, I really don't think it means anything. I think Canelo is probably more just like, let me get in the ring, let me get down to business. I don't really read anything into him looking away first. Both men looked absolutely fantastic on the scales, though. And I think that there's been a lot of chat where people have been saying, oh, they're actually the same size, or Crawford might even be bigger. I think now that you've seen them after rehydration at the ceremonial weigh-ins, I hope now that all of you can see that Crawford is definitely the smaller man. It's not so much that the challenge might be insurmountable, though. That's kind of the point, and that's why I did predict Crawford to win on points, and I'm sticking with that prediction. Not that I'm particularly confident in it. I can absolutely see how Canelo wins this fight, and I do think, that all logic and all the information that we do have says you kind of have to pick Canelo. If you're a gambling man. But if you're like me and you look at the style and you're trying to, you're doing a bit of a reach in terms of the intangibles. I'm trying to say that I think if they were the same size, Crawford wins this. And so I'm trying to predict how much I think the size will impact the fight. I think that there's a chance here that Crawford can do it. And that's why I've gone Crawford on points. But in terms of the size difference, which is what I was just talking about a minute ago, you have to say Canelo is definitely bigger. He's been up at that weight class for way longer. And just look at them at that ceremonial weigh-in when they were facing off. Canelo's neck is considerably thicker. They're around the same height, but without question, Canelo is the thicker man. And I do think there will be as I said, I think there will be a 5 to 10 pound difference between them. I think if I had to give you exact numbers on what I think they're going to weigh in the ring, Crawford was 169.8 when he was in the ring against Madrimov. I think he'll be around about 175 for this fight. Possibly as high as 178 pounds. Maybe 180, but I think that's, if I'm making an accurate prediction, I'm saying 175. Whereas I think that Canelo Alvarez will be 180, 182. So I think it'll be a 5 to 7 pound difference in the ring. But a lot of it is to do with the comfort at the weight. But at the end of the day, what has swung my pick is not the weight. It's the fact that I think Crawford will just about be able to handle the size difference. And I think that stylistically and technically, I think that is what it does it for me. He's going to be all wrong for Canelo in there. That's my prediction. Could be dead wrong, could be an awful prediction, but I think he's going to give Canelo so many problems in this fight. The hand speed, the foot speed, the traps he can set, the counter-punching ability. And then after that, it all comes down to, is the size difference too much? That's my opinion. I definitely don't think all of Crawford's increased weight as well has come from muscle, and I actually do think that's a good thing. And look, don't get me wrong, he's still super lean and super ripped. But now that he's filled out again, you can see he's a little fleshier than when he was down at 154 and 157. Of course, he was going to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think the way he's done the weight, what's interesting about it is he looks strong. He looks natural and full. He doesn't look too big for his frame with the size he's put on, if that makes sense. I just think he looks fit and well at the weight. I was a bit disappointed I didn't get a chance to see his legs. I wanted to see how much extra muscle mass there was on his legs, but we'll see that when he gets to the ring when he's got shorts on. Canelo looks as good as he ever does, and there's been sort of a couple of mentions that he's trained for speed in this one. The thing is, at this stage in his career, I don't think it's possible to see a faster Canelo. I think if it was possible, you would have seen it already because speed absolutely kills. A couple of people were asking me on my live stream yesterday, in my preview show, what I think the first few rounds needs to look like for either man. And I just think that for both of them, they're going to want a good start. But I think a good start looks a bit different for each man. I think a good start for Canelo doesn't necessarily need to see him winning the first 6 rounds. I think as long as he's competitive and he's in the mix in those rounds, that'll be enough for him. I think the big thing for Canelo in those opening few rounds is he needs to make Crawford work. You know, he needs to make Crawford burn more energy than he burns. He needs to make Crawford slow down a bit. If he can get some body work in there, then fantastic. If he can make Crawford really work at a pace he's not comfortable with for 12 rounds, then brilliant. And I think he does that by applying front foot pressure constantly and making Crawford miss, hit gloves, all that kind of stuff. Whereas for Crawford, I think it's a case of making Canelo respect your power, hesitant to walk in, stabbing to the body, as I've talked about. It's a fascinating thing. And I do think with the way Crawford looks at the weight, I think it's going to be so interesting to see how his power carries up, because he has a similar knockout ratio to Canelo in those lower weight divisions. It's not that far apart. So there's every chance that his power carries up the way that Canelo's has. We just don't know until he's in there. What I do know, though, is that he hasn't had enough time to adjust to the weight. It would have been great to see him up there a bit longer. But I think what this comes down to, is, I'm going to repeat my final prediction here, is that Canelo, I think he prefers being up at 168, fighting those slower, more ploddy guys. And the way that Crawford's done this weight, I don't think he's going to be that much slower than he normally is. And I think that the speed that Crawford has, the footwork that Crawford has, the counter-punching ability that Crawford has is something we've not seen Canelo in there with for a very long time. In fact, it's a style he's avoided. And because he's so good himself and because he punches so hard, those guys at 168, they're just slower, ploddier. Even though they hit harder, they suit him better. I think this is going to be his hardest fight since Bivol. I really do. I think this is going to be far and away his hardest fight since Bivol. So we'll see how he gets on in there. We'll see what happens. I've had a couple of people in the comments saying to me, oh, you're going to be a casual after Canelo wins and all this stuff. If you guys don't understand the nuance of what I'm saying, which is that this is a very, very tough to call fight, and it's a 50-50 because we can't predict these intangibles. That's why it's so hard to pick. That's why it's a 50-50 in prediction alone. In the ring, it could be a landslide either way, or it could be super competitive. We just don't know. But I'm sticking with my prediction. I'm sticking with Crawford on points. Your last chance, guys, to get your prediction in the comments section below. Let me know what you thought about the weigh-in, their weights, your final prediction. And a final message to say that I definitely am doing a live stream for this fight. I have tested it last night and everything's good, everything's cool. So we will be doing what we normally do. We'll be watching it along. We'll be scoring the fight as we go. And of course, I'll be reacting to the video after the fight. And of course, I'll be reacting to the fight afterwards with a reaction video with a full detailed story, whatever it is, tactical, technical, all that stuff. We'll be getting into that in the reaction video after the fight. But guys, I can't wait for this one. So I'll see you for the main event. As I always say, on to the next one.